30 meters down, in the crushing, absolute blackness of the Atlantic Ocean, Harrison Okene was sure he was dying, for what felt like an eternity, but was in fact over 60 hours. He had been trapped in a 4-foot pocket of air inside his own sunken tomb. The relentless, icy water had saturated his body for so long it felt like acid, peeling the skin from his tongue, his lips, his hands. The ghostly echoes of his crewmates' final screams still haunted the silence, long since replaced by a new, more horrifying sound, the sickening, tearing noises of sharks feeding on their bodies just outside his thin metal coffin. The air was thick, heavy, and toxic with his own recycled breath. He was fading, losing his grip on reality. And then, a noise, a faint metallic tap. He froze, every nerve ending firing. Was it rescue? Or was his oxygen-starved mind finally, mercifully breaking? This is the incredible true story of Harrison Okene, a 29-year-old ship's cook aboard the Sunken 4, a tugboat operating in the treacherous waters off the coast of Nigeria. In the pre-dawn hours of May 26, 2013, a powerful rogue wave ambushed his vessel, pulling it violently to the bottom of the ocean and killing 11 of his 12 crewmates almost instantly. What happens next is considered by divers, doctors, and scientists to be one of the most medically impossible survivals in all of maritime history. But escaping the initial terrifying sinking was, unbelievably, the easy part. The true soul-crushing terror hadn't even begun. Harrison Okene wasn't a hardened sailor or a thrill-seeking adventurer. He was a cook, a quiet, deeply faithful man who loved his wife more than anything. His life was simple and good. He provided for his family by taking on the demanding but steady work of a ship's cook. The crew knew him as the calm presence in the galley, often humming psalms to himself while preparing their meals. Life at sea was a predictable rhythm. The pre-dawn wake-up, the clatter of pots and pans, the shared meals, the gentle rocking of the boat at night. His world was the small, humming, metallic universe of the Sunken 4. It felt safe. The night before the disaster, he'd spoken to his wife. They'd laughed, talked about the future. He promised, as he always did, to be home soon. On the morning of May 26, 2013, everything was normal. The sea was restless. But it was nothing the 100-ton tugboat and its experienced crew hadn't navigated 100 times before. At 4:30 a.m., while most of his crewmates were still asleep in their bunks, Harrison was awake, using the officer's toilet. It was a completely mundane, forgettable moment of privacy in the middle of a routine shift. A moment that, by a staggering, almost unbelievable twist of fate, would save his life. The steel hallways of the ship were a familiar maze. The constant low thrum of the engines was the comforting heartbeat of his floating home. It was a world that felt solid, secure, and permanent, until it wasn't. Without any warning, a massive unseen wave slammed the Sunken 4 with the force of a freight train. It wasn't a rock or a tilt. It was a violent, world-ending lurch. The ship was lifted and then thrown over, capsizing in less than a minute. Alarms shrieked for a horrifying second before being choked into silence by the sea. The lights went out instantly. The world turned upside down, and the full, terrifying force of the Atlantic Ocean crashed in, a liquid avalanche of freezing, black water plunging everything and everyone into absolute chaos. Harrison was violently catapulted through the darkness, tossed around like a doll by the current flooding the ship's narrow corridors. Salt water filled his mouth and lungs as he was swept from the toilet down a dark passageway. Just as his consciousness was about to give out, he was forced by the rushing water into another bathroom and an adjoining engineer's office. As the massive vessel slammed onto the seabed 100 feet below, landing upside down, this small office miraculously, against all odds, formed a stable air pocket. He surfaced, sputtering, choking, gasping for air in a space just 4 feet high. In the terrifying dark, he could hear the muffled screams of his friends, his family at sea. Then, one by one, the screams stopped. The crushing, silent finality told him everything he needed to know. He was completely and utterly alone, trapped at the bottom of the ocean. But this was only the beginning of his ordeal. Time ceased to exist. In the pitch-black void, wearing only his boxer shorts, the cold was not just a feeling. It was a physical enemy, a predator relentlessly stealing his body heat. Soon, the salt water began to break down his skin, leaving it raw, blistered, and in agonizing pain. Thirst became a maddening obsession. He was surrounded by water, yet he couldn't drink a single drop. Dehydration was setting in. The initial silence was soon broken by a new and visceral horror. The sounds of the ocean's predators. Sharks and barracudas, drawn to the wreck by the scent of death, began their grim work. He could hear them bumping against the hull, tearing at the bodies of his crewmates just outside his thin steel sanctuary. The sounds were a constant, gruesome reminder of his own mortality. In a rare moment of desperate clarity, his hands, numb with cold, found a small wooden panel floating in the dark. With immense effort, he managed to wedge it between some machinery, building a crude platform just big enough to lift his torso out of the icy water. This single, desperate act of engineering probably saved him from dying of hypothermia in the first few hours. But as the hours bled into a day, then 2 days, even that small victory felt meaningless. Hope, a fragile flame, began to flicker and die. After more than 48 hours trapped in absolute darkness and suffocating silence, his mind began to fracture. He started to hallucinate. He saw his wife appearing before him in a shimmering light, holding out a bottle of Coke for him to drink. He recited a psalm she had once sent him over and over, his voice a hoarse, cracked whisper in the foul, stale air. The oxygen in his tiny bubble was steadily running out, being replaced by the carbon dioxide poison of his own exhalations. Every breath was a thick, labored struggle. He knew with a terrifying certainty that he was dying slowly, molecule by molecule. He would die by suffocation, by hypothermia, or by drowning when the air pocket finally failed. He had 2 choices: surrender to the cold and the dark that had already consumed his friends, or cling to a faith that felt 1,000,000 miles away. Then, a sound. A metallic scraping, faint, distant. He instantly dismissed it as another hallucination, a cruel trick of a dying mind. But it came again, louder, a rhythmic banging. It was real. It had to be real. It was the sound of a salvage team, the divers sent not to rescue, but to recover bodies. He fumbled in the dark, his numb hands finding a small hammer he'd found earlier. A surge of panic, colder than the water, shot through him. They weren't looking for him. They were looking for corpses. They would find his friends, tag them, and leave. They could pass right by his tiny pocket of life, completely unaware, leaving him to his fate. He had one chance, one final shot to make himself known. What happened next would determine if he lived or died. The diver's headlamp cut a single lonely beam through the murky chaos of the wreck. The diver, a South African man named Nico van Heerden, was methodically scanning the debris, his eyes accustomed to the grim, routine task of finding the dead. He saw one body, then another. As his light swept past the engineer's office, Harrison saw his chance. Gathering every last shred of energy, he plunged his hand into the water below his platform and tapped the diver. Nico physically recoiled, his training instantly telling him it was just a dead body shifting in the current. But Harrison didn't let go. He grabbed the diver's glove with the last of his strength. Nico froze. This was not the limp, lifeless touch of the dead. Nico's voice, filled with sheer disbelief, crackled over the radio to the surface vessel. "Guys, we've got a survivor!" "I'm telling you, we have a survivor." On the surface, his colleagues were stunned into silence, convinced he was suffering from nitrogen narcosis, a common delusion for deep-sea divers. But as Nico swung his camera around, there was no mistaking it. The blinding light of the headlamp, the warmth of another human's touch, it was all real. But the danger was far from over. Pulling Harrison straight to the surface would kill him instantly from a catastrophic case of the bends, as his body was saturated with nitrogen from breathing pressurized air for 3 days. The rescue became a delicate, high-stakes medical procedure at the bottom of the ocean. The team scrambled, fitting him with a diving helmet and carefully guiding him into a diving bell. He spent the next 60 agonizing hours in a decompression chamber on the surface. Against all odds, he had done the impossible. The physical recovery was punishing, but the psychological wounds were far deeper. Harrison was haunted by an unbearable survivor's guilt, tormented by the memory of being the only one to live. He suffered from severe PTSD, plagued by recurring nightmares of the crushing dark and the icy water. He vowed he would never go near the sea again. Experts were baffled, calling his survival a 1 in a million perfect storm of improbable factors. The precise size and pressure of the air pocket, his ability to get his body out of the water, and above all, his unbreakable mental fortitude. His story became a global symbol of hope, an incredible testament to the power of human resilience in the face of certain death. But in a final, courageous act of defiance, Harrison Okene decided he couldn't let fear win. He faced his trauma head-on, enrolling in a course to become a certified commercial diver. He needed to understand the crushing depths that had almost claimed him, to conquer the very environment that had become his prison. He didn't just survive the bottom of the ocean. He chose to make it his own. The faint knock from the wreck wasn't just a sound. It was the echo of a will to live that refused to be silenced. A testament to the human spirit that can find a glimmer of hope, even in the deepest, darkest corners of the world.